Welcome to the Roundtable Perspective. I'm your host, Tom Roach, and I'm joined today by my guest, Joseph Coates. Joseph is the Assistant Director of the University Library at Purdue University Northwest, and he also is a Professor of Practice at the same university. Joe, I know you're a member of the Society of Indiana Archivists and the Midwest Archives Conference, and also Academic Libraries of Indiana, and you published and co-authored in 2021, Creating Bibliography in the Digital Age, and in 2020, you published Experiential Learning and Oral History.
That's correct.
But right now, you're kind of interested in fake news, I understand.
Yes.
So how does an archivist look at fake news?
One of the things that you have when you're in an archive is that you have all those primary sources that they're here and available. So you hear a lot of people talk about, Thomas Jefferson said this, Thomas Jefferson said that, so on and so forth. Whomever it is would say this. If they have an archive, you can go and look at their writings, look at their diaries, look at what they've actually said, and it's a lot easier to interpret that yourself. There's so many people making so many comments about so many things that they might have heard somewhere, but having those primary sources really can tell you what they actually said, in what context, why they believe that. People that keep a lot of journals or have a lot of writings, it's really kind of easy to interpret what they said by their own writing. So it helps you to make your own decision, and it kind of avoids these sort of almost like folklore of this is what so-and-so said, this is what they believed. Having those sources really helps you to sort of sift through all that.
And I understand that as an archivist, you categorize these different types of fake news, right?
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to hear what those are.
Any archive worth its salt keeps any type of finding aid, so it's like a book index. And I've worked in 3 or 4 different archives over my career, and there are a lot of things that you can find, like you said, that you hear these things and you read it and you're like, no, it's right here. He said it right here. Or here's a video of them saying it. And then people, they tend to believe what they want to believe even when confronted by evidence, though. So that's problematic.
Yeah, so how do you feel about that?
I struggle. I think fake news is going to really be, the proliferation of fake news is really going to damage our society in the long run. We're going to be able to find anything that our biases will feed into. If you want to believe in conspiracy theories or create your own, you can start a website. You can put all of this online, and somebody out there will read it and possibly believe it.
Yeah. But we seem to be preoccupied with this today, especially during election time. And I think back on it historically. There was a time in the history of America where the average person didn't even read,
right?
Let alone have access to things on mass media. So hasn't this always been an issue? I mean, is there ever really time in history where you can say people knew exactly what was going on?
Oh, no, never.
And knew their place in history?
Never. I think it's just so much easier to get nowadays. It's so much easier to find news that feeds your bias.
Yeah.
You can go and find a Reddit forum or read on social media or Substack, or there's just websites that let you do it, and everybody has access to the internet on a phone, on whatever, and can really access it a lot easier than in the past, where you had to sort of seek out news. And the truth was always there, but it's problematic, and it's not that people believe certain things, it's that they're making their decisions on things that might be untrue, and that leads to, if we have another sort of a pandemic again and people are getting false information, it can lead to a lot of death, it can lead to a lot of healthcare burnout, it could hurt our infrastructure, our hospitals, those type of things. So it's important that people have good information and then you're going to make a decision off what you believe once you have all the information. You want to make sure that you're starting from that, getting the correct information.
It seems to me that one of the transitions that's happened in the last 50 years is basically dealing with publishing. for a few hundred years here, if you had something published in a book, you had to have a reputation that would give you the authority
Right.
to do this, and it would whatever you've written or had to say would go through editors, and it would be tested by reviews and things like that, and then it would hit the mass public, right, in the front
Right.
of a book. When radio and television opened up, and now social media, it's possible for anyone to get a message out to any number of people, given the right circumstances.
Sure.
So the joke used to be, well, it has to be true. I read it, but that really was fairly true.
Yes.
50 years ago. But that's really not anymore. And so are we? Did we actually go through because of publishing? Did we actually go through a period where we had a better understanding of history and news because of that filter that was built into the system, and now that filter isn't there, and so we're going back to something that looks a little more like what life was like, in pre-revolutionary America, for instance, right?
I think, some of the technology that we have is both a blessing and a curse.
Yeah.
So anybody with an iPhone and internet access can start their own YouTube channel, can start their own blog, and it's easier to spread this. It's easier to get followers. It's easier to get people that start buying into these things. Yeah. As far as publishing, one of the things that when we teach our students when they first come in is looking out for fake news, or looking for we walk them through, here's what the peer review process looks like.
Yeah.
We talk about things like the CRAP test. So is it current? Is it relevant? Who's the author? When was it published?
The CRAP test is a method for evaluating the reliability of information sources. It is used to determine if a source is suitable for academic writing or research, and is a good way to determine if something is fake news. It is an acronym, CRAP, that stands for Current. How recent is the information? Relevance. How applicable is the information to the topic? Authority. How trustworthy is the source of the information? Purpose. What is the purpose of the information? Using these 4 steps, you can determine the credibility of information you receive.
One of the things that I try to explain to students is, and over time, something that was correct before may no longer be correct. I always like to use the federal highway system. In the 50s, when we were building the highway system, it was the best thing since sliced bread. You can move goods and services all over the country. People were able to buy homes out in suburbia and be able to drive around and do all these things that they wanted to do. And now that you look at what happened then, they're not tearing down rich people houses to build the interstates. So they're cutting up, lower class minorities to build these highways.
Sometimes it's an excuse to get rid of a neighborhood.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Or like in Chicago, they kind of pinned the poor community right in between the expressways. Yeah. And, you have food deserts and you also end up with like the homogenization of America. So you start losing a lot of that cultural interest. You end up having McDonald's at every stop. So you end up getting rid of public transportation.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things that when you look at, well, this was good in the 60s, 70s, whatever, and then, as it moves down, you start looking and going, well, maybe this wasn't the best decision. Yeah. So, as far as when you look at publication dates, studies they did, in science, we go through and there's a lot there. Just to speak of fake news, you'll see a lot of times on social media or even local news agencies will go to a public library or academic library and see a dumpster full of books. They're like, oh, they're throwing away all of these treasures. Yeah. We just did that this summer. We had psychology books on the shelf from the 50s and 60s. We had a lot of things
which are no longer relevant.
Which are no longer relevant.
Yeah, right.
And if we're doing a disservice, it's not helpful for the students. It's not helpful for us to keep those on the shelf. It's spreading bad information.
So as an archivist, then you're not just preserving things, you're also contextualizing them, and then there's a certain level of evaluation that goes on there, right?
Yes, yeah. When we get personal papers in, we try to make sure that there's always a subject. So we'll talk about the person, what they did, what they studied. So one of the things that I like telling my students is just because your professor has a Ph.D. in something doesn't make him an expert on everything.
Right.
So if you're looking through somebody,
We don't really believe that,
Right.
but the students should probably know that. Yeah,
the
it's safe
students
to
should
tell
know
them
the
that,
truth. Yeah.
Yeah.
But we saw a lot of that during the pandemic. People would say, "Oh, well, Dr. So-and-so says such and such." Well, Dr. So-and-so had a degree in like 19th century
Yes.
Russian literature, right?
right.
So who cares? We don't want them doing, they're experts in their field.
A good point about that is if you got your PhD in Russian literature, right, you probably didn't spend much time reading anything else.
Exactly,
right?
exactly.
And so you may have less than the average IQ when it comes to the other things.
Yeah, you're not going through medical journals
No,
looking at,
no.
the newest, there's a reason why you chose it, because you probably weren't good at science.
Probably,
That's why I
yeah.
became a librarian.
Yeah,
I'm not
yeah.
good at math. So, you have to stick with what you know. But, that's one of the ways that I see, and it's every couple of months there's a story. This library's purging all these books.
Yeah.
There was a fire, or they were cleaning out a storage unit or
Yeah.
something like that. So,
I think there's a second tier problem, tell me what you think about this when it comes to fake news, and that is that if we're having a dialogue about what's real and what's fake, right, it seems like it also causes people to be a little less trusting of official sources of information.
Sure.
And I think of some friends of ours. One of my friends is an oncologist, and another friend is someone who's into home health remedies and stuff. And when people get together and she's advising people on her health remedies, you can see him just steaming up inside and walking out of the room. But I think there's a lot of that going on now. Am I right? I mean, there are sources that we should be trusting.
Sure.
That people aren't trusting because somehow it's all been thrown up for grabs.
I think what brings part of that, especially with medical, social, a lot of that,
Yeah.
is you have lifelong researchers, you have lifelong bureaucrats. Their entire job is to study something.
Yeah.
And they do it without bias. And then it hits the political end of that.
Yeah.
And then it gets you manipulate the facts in order to get the message out that you want to get out to benefit your group.
Yeah.
And that's also harmful. There should be a lot of things that aren't controversial, like polio shots, not really a bad thing. So you can talk about research that's come out on for what age you should get it at, where you're going to there's a lot of things that you can discuss, but the fact is when you can use something to eradicate disease, you should probably go with it.
What do you think then? The average person should do about this? I mean, let me put it this way: no one can claim that they're objective, right? Not the reporters for the New York Times or the oncologists or anybody. We all have, because we're human beings, all of our opinions have a level of subjectivity to them, right?
Sure.
But the point is that some people are trying to be objective and are more objective than others. Some people are trying to not be objective, right?
Right.
And so it always seemed to me that that people who aren't expert in these areas need to try to at least be discerning on what their source is. Maybe not automatically believe everything that an official source has to say, right? But understand that a reporter for the New York Times is at least trying to be objective and will get fired if they get caught making something up.
Right.
Whereas somebody with a blog can say anything they want, no one's checking it, and they have no repercussions if they make things up or deliberately lie, right?
Right. One of my goals for all of our students when they come through, I work with the incoming freshmen for the GS courses, is to make sure they understand how to use the database, or at least have a concept of it.
Yeah.
Because like I tell them, you're getting peer-reviewed information. It goes through a process to make sure that it's the best information available at the time. It can also be flawed. That's a thing that does happen.
Yeah.
There's predatory publishing. There's a lot of issues out there that can let bad information into a spot that should have good information. But, we have access to that. In the state of Indiana, we have the Indiana State Library. They subscribe to these databases as a taxpayer in Indiana. You have access to that. Use your local library, ask them for help. They should be objective on finding material for you if you're interested in finding something. And we have access to that peer-reviewed scientific information that comes out.
And it means, it gives you a better guess as to what's going on, right?
Right.
You want to assess it as best you can. I also wanted to bring up that you combine your roles as a professor and as an archivist with some classes, and you did one on oral history.
Yes.
I think. Can
Yes.
you talk about? And I team taught that with you.
You did.
So I'm
yes.
familiar with it. Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's actually nice seeing you interview. I got to listen to your lecture for that for a couple of weeks. It was nice to see.
Yeah, my role was I came in and talked to the students on how to do the interviews, right?
Right.
And you told them what to look for, right?
Right, and just, who to find and why it's important. And I think that's one of the reasons that we want to keep those interviews around. We have a lot of people that as society changes and as things change, they're not going to, it's things that we won't experience today.
Yeah.
When my dad talks about when he got his first job at the steel mill, he basically walked out of his high school graduation, spent the weekend at home, walked into the mill, got a job.
Yeah.
And worked there for 50 years. And just the lack of safety and all the things that they used to be able to get away with. People don't believe me or don't believe him when he tells them, oh, this is what we did in the 70s. And they're like, oh, how did you not die of things? He said, well, some did. But it's important to understand that over time things change. It's also important to understand that people's memories are not always the best.
Yeah.
There's a big project that they did for Kent State about the National Guard shooting there during the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
And they interviewed different people who were there who witnessed it. And all of their memories of it are all different because there's different points of view and there's different levels of trauma and there's different sort of time kind of takes its toll and you remember. But getting the perspective of people who actually lived history is important because it helps us. If you read something in a book, it can just tell you, sure, this is what happened, but it's always nice to understand what happened to the people that actually worked there or experienced that firsthand.
And they're going to see it differently than somebody who is a history scholar who is writing about it and publishing books. Although there has been more of an emphasis, I think, in our lifetimes on trying to tell history from the perspective of the average person and not just in terms of wars and pacts and things like that.
Right. And I think Howard Zinn was kind of the one that kicked that off or at least became that kind of wrote about the social history of the United States, which made a lot of people angry because it was sort of changing the perspective of what they had been told their whole life.
So just from for those of us who are lay people when it comes to this, what's the difference between a library, a museum, and an archive?
So the main part, libraries, we try to curate an entire collection for our user base. So here at P&W, we curate more academic items. When you were talking about bias earlier, we all have biases when we purchase items for that.
Yeah, the selection of the books is
the selection of the book.
Isn't it?
It is. So
we're all guilty of this to some extent. Yes.
I order for political science, so I try to order anything from sort of your libertarian to your communism because I want our students to have all the information available so they can read everything, synthesize the information, and come to their own conclusion.
Yeah.
Libraries tend to have materials that are replaceable. So if we need something, we can order it and replace it. And that collection is fluid. We change as time changes. An archive, our goal is to save historical documentation. So we tend to rely on audiovisual materials, manuscripts, things like that. So somebody's personal writings or one of my favorites that I use as archive footage is the Hindenburg explosion. You know, that news clipping there, that newsreel. That's an archival event. We can witness what happened.
That announcer's hysterical voice.
Yeah, yes.
Who can forget that?
And you get a feel for what it was like to witness that.
It's starting to rain again. The rain had slacked up a little bit. The back motors of the ship are just holding it just enough to keep it from... It bursts into flames. Get it started. It's crashing. It's crashing terrible. Oh, my, get out of the way, please. It's bursting into flames, and it's falling on the mooring mast and all the folks between it. This is terrible. This is one of the worst catastrophes in the world. Oh, it's like 400 or 500 feet into the sky, and it's a terrific crash, ladies and gentlemen. The smoke and the flames now, and the flame is crashing to the ground, not quite to the mooring mast. All the humanity and all the furniture speeding around it. I can't talk to people. There's friends around there. I can't talk, ladies and gentlemen.
As archives, we collect photographs, things like that. Museums tend to deal with more three-dimensional objects. So things like, one of the things that I'm working with right now is the Museum of Science and Industry, and they are going to start a steel exhibit on how to make steel. They've never had one before, and they're in an area that makes steel. So things like hard hats and safety glasses and metacarpal boots and things we're loaning to them to go on display so people can experience what it's like to see the process, not read about the process. They tend to save everything, whereas archives, if you go to a museum and an item is broken or lost, it's gone. Whereas us, a lot of times if there's damage to, let's say, a collection of newspaper clippings, we can scan them and throw away the originals because the more important part is the actual information on it and not the actual item itself. So, yeah, it's every year we get asked about insurance. And you're like, we can't insure it. All of this is just paper. There's no real value to it monetarily.
Before it got to you, it was junk, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Nobody valued it, right?
Some faculty member retired, and we ended up going through their collections, or somebody donated something. So, yeah.
I actually saw the collection at Pullman that was moved over here before it was moved, and it was in a warehouse. And I was walking around picking things up.
Yes,
and, kicking them to see if how heavy they were.
We ended up with 32 pallets of things, and we still, the items that you find in there, we did have to dispose of some of it because it was covered in some kind of caustic material.
I'm sure
so we
it
didn't want
was.
anybody to get hurt. But yeah, there's a lot of history in those that you can.
Very good.
Yep.
And one other thing, one of the projects is the Calumet Region Bibliography. Can you summarize that for us quickly?
Yeah. So Lance Trusty, who was one of our professors here in the past, he had written a bibliography in 1982. And
that's a piece of history at this point.
It is,
right?
exactly. Yeah. And he only covered northern Lake County and Porter County, sort of Route 6 and north. During the pandemic, when we were all at home, instead of just sitting and drinking box wine all day,
right.
thought, oh, maybe I can do something constructive.
Right.
So we digitized that, and then we started adding to it.
And this bibliography had what kinds of things in it?
Oh, we have writings all the way back to the very founding of Northwest Indiana, plat maps of the Kankakee River before it was dredged.
So it was a list of all of the documents and writings that were available dealing
books,
with this area.
Newspapers, and there are subcategories. So if you just want to know about railroads of the Calumet region, we have all the books and things that were written about that also.
Yeah. What's something interesting that we might learn if we delved into that bibliography?
I'm a big, the Wright brothers get all the credit for the plane. We had our own guy up here at the dunes, Knut Rockne, I think was his name, but he was doing the same thing with the gliders trying to fly off the dunes to get going, and we have his writings. And there was a ammunition factory on the dunes for World War II or World War I that had an explosion, and if you look at the older ball jars that were made,
Yeah.
one of the big exports of Northwest Indiana was sort of shoveling up sand, tearing down dunes, and then sending it to Muncie to be made into ball jars.
No kidding. Blue ones? The
Yeah,
blue ball
they've
jars?
got like a blue tinge.
Yeah.
All that sand sort of came from the Lake Michigan area.
So if somebody has one, if they look on the bottom, will it say Muncie or anything?
No, they're usually just made in that 20s through 40s area when
Yeah.
we were just tearing stuff down to
Yeah,
move sand
yeah,
around,
yeah.
to build mills and all that. So.
Okay, well, that's all the time we have for our program. Thank you to Joseph Coates for joining me today on the Roundtable Perspective. I'm Tom Roach. See you next time.